Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's tutorial is on how to cut and sew this beautiful two-tier gathers gown. If you're interested in learning this, please keep watching this video and also hit the like button. So I'll be starting with a little bit of explanation so as to enable you understand better. To get started, you will need to write down your waist and hip circumference and also write down your half length, which can also be your shoulder to waist, and also you will need your full length, which is the total length of your gown from the shoulder to the ankle or to the floor, just wherever you want your gown to stop. As you can see, my half length is 17 inches, which is my shoulder to my waistline. So now to get the length of the remaining part of my gown, I'll be subtracting 17 inches from 60 inches, which is 43 inches. So from my waistline down is 43 inches. So guys, if you notice from the picture that there is no gathers from the waistline but at the hip line, and at the hip line has a basque effect. Now from waist to my hip line is 9 inches. I'll be subtracting 9 inches from 43 inches, which is 34 inches. So now this means from my hip line down to the end of my dress is 34 inches. I'll be dividing that by 2 and it gave me 17 inches, which means the second step and the third step will have a length of 17 inches. And if you add 17 inches plus 17 inches plus the 9 inch, which is the length of the first step, will give you 43 inches. So guys, we're done with the first part, and the second part now is to find out the width of your dress. For the waistline, the width will be your waist circumference because there is no gathers, and at that hip line over there, the width of your fabric should be your hip circumference times 2. That is the parts which you'll be sewing your gather stitch should be your hip circumference times 2. So mine is 42 inches, and 42 inches times 2 is 84, which means for the second step, I'll be cutting out a width of 84 inches and a length of 17 inches. I hope you understand that part. And I'll make a gather stitch and sew it on the hip line after making the basque effect. And then for the third step, I'm going to multiply my hip circumference times 3, which is 126. So I'll be cutting out a width of 126 inches and a length of 17 inches. Also note that when cutting out your first step, you should add your sewing allowance and also your zipper allowance. So now whatsoever you want to do with the upper bodice is up to you, and I'll be dropping a link in my description box on my video on how to draft a basic bodice pattern. Now for the length, when cutting out the length, you will need to add 0.5 to 2 inches to the original length because you'll be joining these pieces together. For the second step, I added 1 inch upward and 1 inch downwards, and for the third step, I added 2 inches upwards and 1 inch downwards. And also for the first step, I added 0.5 inch upwards and 1 inch downwards because I'll be joining all these pieces together. For the basque effect at the hip line, you will have to get pattern paper and fold into 2 because you're working on the front piece. Now mark 0.5 inch downwards or 0.75 inch or 1 inch downwards, depending on how much you want for the joining of the upper bodice to the down part. Now mark your hip line. I marked 9 inches, which is my waist to hip line. Now the next thing you do now is to mark your waist circumference and add your sewing allowance to that. Mark your hip circumference and add 1-inch sewing allowance and connect those points together. Now I have my hip line and I have my waistline. So the next thing you will do on the folded part, which is your center front, mark 2 inches inwards, and on the side mark 5 inches or 6 inches downwards and connect it to the 2 inches inwards you marked earlier, and make a sort of curve around that part because you don't need any pointy edge. You can as well use your curve rule to do this. So this is all for the back's effect at the hip line. So go ahead and cut out a pattern, and when cutting on your actual fabric, you should add 1 inch downwards after the hip line. So guys, over here I'm going to reduce the side by 1 inch because I said earlier on that you can mark 5 inches or 6 inches. So I am going to reduce the side by 1 inch, and I'm connecting it to the center front, the 2 inches I marked after the center front line, and making a sort of curve around that area. Now you can see how it looks now. So guys, over here I'm done cutting on my actual fabric, and I added 0.7 inch upwards and 1 inch downwards, and for my zipper allowance I marked 1.5 inches as my zipper allowance. So guys, go ahead and close up your zipper allowance by 4 to 5 inches upwards because you'll be joining your gathered stitch to that part. So just sew upwards by 4 to 5 inches, then open it up and place the right side facing right side, and with the sewing allowance you give, just mark 1 inch and sew on that line. Also note that the open part of your zipper allowance is for your zipper. So guys, when I'm done sewing, I'm just going to turn this over to the right side. I also went ahead to make a gather stitch on the second step, and I'll be joining that part to my hip line. I cut out a width of 84 inches, which is my hip circumference times 2, and a length of 17 inches, but I added 1 inch upwards and 1 inch downwards. As you can see, this is unfold, this is 44 inches. I added extra inches and then 1 inch upwards and 1 inch downwards. I'm just going to go ahead and make a gather stitch and then join it to this part here, to the first part. Now I am done joining it to this part, and this is how it looks. So I have my first step and the second step ready. And over here I took the circumference of the second step so as to know how much to spread the third step. I also made a gather stitch on this part here, and I'll be joining it to the third step. While making my gather stitch, I made a fold on the upper part because I'll be joining the upper part on top of the second piece. I don't know if you understand. I made a fold and made a top stitch there to make my gathers. You can see that I made a fold, and I'm just going to sew it on top of the second step. And that will be all for this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.